Welcome everybody. This is a Bitcoin Association sponsored webinar, and the topic today is the Technical Standards Committee. Technical Standards Committee has been a work in progress kind of in the background through most of 2020, and I think we kind of came out of the woodwork and declared ourselves ready to actually operate at the beginning of this year. So we want to give you a bit of background on what the TSC is and where it's come from, and more importantly, how you can participate. So we've got three main sections, I think, to our agenda today. First, we're going to have a presentation from Alex Fovell, a member of the TSC, who I'm sure many of you will recognize as a co-founder and general partner of Two Hot Ventures. He's going to be talking about the technical standards program itself, what it is, how it's structured, and how we kind of generally operate. Next, we are going to have James McLeod, who's the CTO of the Hopper, and he's going to be talking about the Technical Standards Committee Roadmap. And this is not a document that is set in stone yet. That's a thing we like to do in Bitcoin, but it's still very much in development, and it's a process that we really want people in the ecosystem who are involved with developing applications on Bitcoin to get involved in, because we really actually want to hear from you. And finally, we're going to have a Q&A session, which is going to be chaired by Angus Brown, co-founder and CEO of Centbee, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. So I'm just going to begin quickly by giving you a bit of a history, how we actually got to the TSC. Its origins actually date back to the CoinGeek conference in London in 2018. That was just a few days after the hash war. That was a heady time because a lot of us were, well, some of us were quite tired because we've been up for 18 hours a day during the hash war experience, but a lot of us were trying to work out what next steps were because we had this brand new kind of ecosystem. But I found myself having very much the same conversation with a lot of people who were active in the wallet space, and it was people like Moneybutton, Handcash, Centbee. They were probably the biggest wallets at the time, as well as a few others. And like I said, it was the same conversation. We were talking about technical issues that needed to be resolved. And a lot of them were technical issues that, with regard to how to interoperate with other wallets. And so the idea for the first wallet workshop was born, and BA kindly sponsored that, and we brought a bunch of people together again in London to try to work out if there are common solutions to some of these problems. And out of that workshop was actually born PayMail, which was a solution to a specific problem of how do we get payment details from the receiver to the sender of a transaction. And it was one solution to a problem. It was one way to address it. But the important thing about PayMail at the time was that it was currently the only way, because no one had ever done this before. It was an incredibly productive experience that everybody enjoyed. And it was a real eye-opener in the sense that we were exploring a new frontier of dealing with intellectual property in a way that probably wouldn't have been terribly popular in older Bitcoin Cash or Bitcoin Core circles. But we got there and we produced a thing called PayMail that's in wide use and wide adoption today. So of course we wanted to repeat the experience, and so Wallet Workshop 2 happened later on that year, and we tried to open it up to a wider audience, and we probably ended up with 2 to 3 times as many people there. And what emerged from that was that there were actually a ton of different areas that needed to be worked on, and it wasn't really effective for us all to try to do that together. All to try to do all of those things at that particular workshop. So we talked about what would come next. We need something in place to allow these sort of group collaborations to happen. So these kinds of technical collaborations, what became obvious to us is that it requires some kind of a process. Whether you recognize it or not, it does. There's always, when you're dealing with a technical issue, there's always a lot of questions that need to be answered. And there's a lot of mundane stuff like decisions about admin, like how are we actually going to collaborate? What document format are we going to use? You know, are we going to take this out for public consultation? Or do we want to have NDAs in place between us? What are we going to do if there's IP? A lot of those questions are just, you know, kind of boring work that it does need to be done. But every time you go through this sort of collaborative technical process, usually the same questions come up. So when the decision was made to form the TSC, one of the core things was to work out what is its function. And the core goal is to let the people who need to do technical collaboration to allow interoperability within the ecosystem to actually just focus on that and not get bogged down in answering these same questions that come up every single time you go through this process. So the TSC is not here to decide what standards are. It really is here to help industry go through that process of deciding for themselves. And that was largely the focus of the work that happened in 2020 during the formation of the TSC. It took a while, but bear in mind, it was mostly done by volunteers through the course of that year. So yeah, that has kind of taken us some time, but we really reached the point at the beginning of this year where we're ready for launch, and we went through the whole process of taking a standard through the process that we had developed so that we could iron out all the bugs and work out where we had areas that were missing, so that when we were ready to accommodate standards that are driven by industry, we have all of that there. So when someone comes and says, oh, I think we need a standard to, I don't know, exchange phone numbers or something like that, the people that need to get that standard written can just get on with it straight away. So the take-home message is, and I think some people probably laid bets on whether I would try to say this or not, but working with the TSC and in the TSC process actually can be fun if you enjoy the technical process, the technical collaboration, because we've tried really hard to take away the kind of boring and mundane bits so that you can really focus on that. So just a quick word on the webinar itself. We do have a Q&A feature. On your screen, there's going to be a button somewhere in Zoom that you need to click. You probably have to move your mouse to show the buttons up. So if you've got a specific question, please use that feature and pop your question in there rather than in the chat, because I'm sure there'll be a lot of comments that go through the chat, and it'll be harder for us to find those questions. So yeah, pop them in there, and we're going to have the Q&A session at the end, so don't worry if a presentation finishes and we haven't addressed your question. We're going to try and get to them all at the end. So we'll move on to our first main presentation now, which is Alex Pavel from TwoHop. All of our presentations are actually from TSC members right now. And he's going to talk through the program itself and how you can get involved.
Hi everyone, hope everyone's doing well. I'm going to go straight into it. So effectively, we're looking at technical standards. Standards are voluntary tools which define agreed good practices from the basis of product development by establishing consistent protocols that have been universally understood and adopted. Specifically, standards mean that multiple organizations don't have to solve the same problem over and over again. History has shown that technical standards encourage the growth of industries through compatible and interoperable interoperability between different businesses. Think about if there was no standardization for screws and physical materials, it'd be basically impossible to build the products and services we have today. That's why standards are important, but they also speed up the implementation of technologies that influence and transform the ecosystem by generating credibility to the new products and applications that integrate them. They define good practices, as I said before, but they're not always the best way to do things. So if you can figure out a better way of doing it, all the better. Propose an update to a standard through the TSC, and it may just get accepted and replace the previous one. All standards do is limit the need for industries to reinvent the same things again. They are not requirements. They help everyone trying to build and integrate with one another. They support sustainability by ensuring that entities can coordinate interoperable based technology upgrades. So for example, the USB cables are a great example of this. We're trying to move towards USB-C, and the entire industry will do eventually, but it's going to take time. They also allow technology to work seamlessly so the ecosystem can operate smoothly. The Bitcoin SV technical standards and standard organization is one of the highest because we have a unique focus and specialism on BSV. Whilst others are focusing on general solutions for all blockchains, they can't use all the features of the blockchain due to differences in designs of them. That is one of our key advantages. Being under the Bitcoin Association's umbrella, we're positioned within the network of industry experts that plays an important role of the development of the Bitcoin SV ecosystem. The governance and process of the committee consists of a number of seasoned BSV professionals. You're likely familiar with most of them. We'll also be working with a variety of others across the industry. The initial committee represents 4 continents, 7 countries, and diverse sectors, including wallets, mining, applications, token solutions, venture investment, and banking. The TSC's mission: to promote technical excellence and improve Bitcoin SV's utility by enhancing interoperability through standardization. Our aim is to facilitate industry participation in the development of the global standards, ensuring technical standards are maintained and that they remain freely available. The standards are produced, and how are the standards produced and who's involved with what? In the designing of this process, we were very careful to consider the fact that people within the industry have an interest in what is produced, and a lot of them probably actually have a better understanding of some of the problems than those in the actual committee. So the technical standards program is the thing that will be producing the standards, and it's governed by the TSC, the Technical Standards Committee. It's the industry participants who recognize the need and come together to standardize ways that applications can interoperate. The TSP is designed to promote the growth of the Bitcoin SV interoperability between systems and enhance credibility of solutions built on top of Bitcoin SV from a perspective of auditors, regulators, and insurers and clients. So this all encourages the development of certification schemes and fosters the business growth, and it also infers a signal to the market in a globally significant way that Bitcoin SV is something to be taken seriously. The strength of the Bitcoin SV Technical Standards Committee is that they're all developed by the people that need them. Industry experts are involved at all stages and from deciding what new standards are needed and defining the technical content and reviewing and monitoring the industry adoption once published. The TSC serves as facilitators for the standards development process, offering platforms, rules, governance, methodologies, and access to the specialists such as technical writers who objectively address the standards in development lifecycle. Each standard is developed by a working group, which is also assigned a TSC sponsor. The sponsors independently oversee the work group, ensuring the policies are maintained, the processes are maintained, and guarantee a high quality of work to reinforce the reliance on these standards throughout the industry. As I keep saying, we do not decide when new standards are needed. This is an industry-driven thing. The industry submits proposals to create a new standard. Once it's published, the TSC monitors how the industry has taken that up and determines whether the standard has received sufficient adoption to be promoted to a recommendation. The TSC standards are developed by experts from all over the world. Anyone can join them, organized into working groups. They're involved at all stages of the standard development process, from deciding whether a new standard is needed, defining all the technical content and reviewing, and also monitoring the industry adoption. This is a collaborative and open process, so all interested parties should get involved as much as possible. We've defined visible procedures for the creation of these standards so that we can monitor and record how the procedure is going. The working group sponsor and the project coordinator will ensure that the process is followed and it's effectively due process. Developing the standards is consensus-based, so the comments from stakeholders during the entire process are all taken into account. That doesn't necessarily mean your comments will change things, but that we will definitely seriously consider them. So what does the process flow actually look like? Well, in summary, the standardization process is split into 3 phases. The first one is the proposal of a standard, and it's in the submission phase. If the proposal passes the checkpoint review, a work group will be formed. Once the work group is formed, the standard moves into the drafting and review phase. This is where authors start working on the draft, which will be put into internal review, and intellectual property review will be completed, and where needed, a specialist will review. It's during this stage that an NDA would be in effect. This is almost a standard requirement for industry players. And when we say industry players, we don't just mean BSV industry players, we mean people like Sony, people like IBM. They will want to know that their IP is not going to be compromised. The last phase in the standardization is the standardization phase, effectively. This is where we say this is good enough to become a standard, and hopefully the industry will adopt it. The final decision, though, is whether we keep the standard as a and promote it to recommendation, or we withdraw it entirely because the industry has not shown the interest that we initially thought. This is why we want our process to be industry driven, because we don't want necessarily to have to be withdrawing standards that we've spent months producing. So how do you get involved, and what are the responsibilities if you do? We encourage participation in the entire life cycle that you can do. There are diverse roles, and there are very different time commitments required for each role. You don't have to be technical to be part of the working group or get involved with the public review. Expertise, of course, has many different areas. As part of the standardization process, the draft standards are developed by the working group, which will be publicly available for the first time as part of the 2-month public review process. It's this public review process that represents an opportunity for industry experts outside of the core working group to review and comment on the draft. It must be said, do not leave topics that are important to you or your business to others. You should be looking to proactively join. We welcome application from experts from all across the industry and strive to have a balance in stakeholder views. The participant might be individual experts or They can be all ages and all backgrounds, seasoned professionals with industry innovators at the forefront of the field, nominated representatives of public and government institutions, regulators and representatives of standard settings organizations. By getting involved in the standardization process and joining a work group, you can help shape the content of new standards that will affect your business. So again, don't leave it up to other people. Any concerns or issues you can consider taken into account during the drafting and development process. If you can't afford the time commitment, then you could look at that in public review. But if you really want to ensure an effect, you should be looking to join a work group. By proposing a standard to the TSC, you're participating in a work group and have access to a defined process that will ensure the quality and impartiality and patience and pertinence of the standardization procedure. You'll get a dedicated guidance from sponsors and the working group itself, a project coordinator, a technical writer, and the ability to request special advice from the Bitcoin Association network. Tooling and resources will allow you to create and concentrate on the standard development as opposed to, mulling around with what platforms to use and things like that. We'll also be providing onboarding videos so that you know how the process works and what may be expected of you, and the supporting documentation to go along with that. You'll get mechanisms to protect the information that you're sharing with the working group. You'll get a copyright policy, IP guidance, and a template to achieve an open BSV licensing. You'll get, at the end of it, a platform that makes the standard freely available and easily accessible to anyone that wants to implement the technology that you helped standardize and potentially create. So the working groups consist of a proposer, an author, a reviewer, and each working group will be assigned a TSC sponsor. They'll usually meet for a set period of time, maybe every week, maybe every 2 weeks. It's up to the work group to share information and evidence and lessons learned, explore opportunities for innovation to overcome the common challenges, and ensure that systems and tools are being designed so that once implemented, they work together. Public reviewers are the external stakeholders. They comment on the standards once they're public. There will be opportunities to adjust the standard after that public review, but they will be much more limited than the working groups. The proposer is the individual or group who collectively identify the need for the standard. The proposers are tasked to identify that scope. At their simplest level, the technical standards attempt to encapsulate in a relatively concise document the details necessary to enable uniformity of practice across a diverse range of implementations. The benefits of becoming the proposer is to give your organization a voice in the development, ensure your organization's technical needs are actually addressed in the standard and in a timely manner and when you think is appropriate. Actively participating in the shaping of the standards, even if you're not attached to an organization. Ensuring that you're building in the right direction due to technical debt or waste, and allow for maximum interoperability with the rest of the industry. This may not be a problem if you think you have a better solution than everyone else, but it's important to recognize that even if you do, you're likely going to have to work with others anyway. And that helps keep market access open for you in the future. To actually submit a proposal, you'll want to go to tsc.bitcoinassociation.net. There you'll find a drop down of proposed in contribute, and then it's the first thing, proposed standard. It's from there that you'll find the guidance on how to actually do that. The authors are the individuals in the industry that are tasked with actually writing the standard. Proposers are preferred candidates for that, but they're not necessarily going to be the ones to take on that role. The TSC will on occasion express interest on joining working groups, getting an author from another source other than the one that was proposed. Reviewers are selected individuals from the industry who will confidentially review and draft the things that are produced by the authors. This will happen before public review, of course, so we can ensure the highest quality and most consistent standard in the industry. The standards in consideration allow for the expression of interest to join a working group, as the reviewers will be published on the TSC website. I have to say it again because it's the most important thing that probably everyone in this community keeps on forgetting. You should not be leaving topics that are important to you to other people. You have to proactively join in shaping them. You need a voice in developing that standard that's important to you. You're helping implement useful technology into the market or advocating to discontinue the use of an undesirable or outdated one. Also, joining a working group will keep you up to date with developments, and it will help exchange information in a secure way, a way that you can be confident that people aren't going to necessarily take your ideas from you. You'll get constructive feedback on whether the technologies you're thinking about will be worthwhile of potentially a very early stage of development. I'm kind of assuming here that you've already got an idea of a business direction you want to go in with the technology that you're moving forward with, but it's important to keep others up to date with that direction. You'll also get personal recognition. Joining a work group will provide participants with the opportunity to communicate with other people in the industry in a way that you may not be able to do outside. And it, most importantly, can boost your personal knowledge that contributes to you being able to do what you want to do. The standards in consideration will allow for the expressions of interest to join a work group. So here, if you go to the same address as before, /standards, you're able to potentially join as an author or maybe another role. These will be published to the TSC website under the standards catalog, and it will be noticeable when it says in consideration. I'm not sure whether you can see that in my screen because the font's quite small, but it'll say in consideration. And then the draft standards will be that have been developed by the working group will be published publicly for the first time. And again, this will be a 2-month period public review. So it should give anyone that's not actively in the working group ample opportunity to actually comment on them. This is an opportunity not just for industry experts, but all people. We prefer if people were industry experts, but we'll get to that. Hopefully, it's only industry experts that are actually interested in it. The public reviewer comments on the TSC on the website will be published, but they don't actually require you to join the working group or take part in any other way. It only requires a TSC website account. This offers participants the opportunity to give feedback with a minimal time commitment, but also ends up with the least amount of influence. So make sure you choose wisely what you actually want to participate in. That's the end of the introduction. Thank you. And I think Steve will be taking over from here.
Thank you, Alex. So we've had a couple of questions pop through during that presentation. Just a reminder, we're going to get to them after. We're going to do a proper Q&A session to address all of the questions. Our next section, though, is a discussion of the Technical Standards Committee Roadmap, which is currently in draft, which we actually would like to encourage you to participate in. We're going to be led by James McLeod, who's the CTO of the Hopper in London, and probably a few other places. Is James ready to go? Yeah, looks like he's ready to go. Okay, I'll hand over to James and we'll be back afterwards for Q&A. Thank you.
Good evening, or good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. I work for a technology incubator called The Hopper, as Steve mentioned, and we develop a number of cryptocurrency and blockchain applications. And we can see the benefit of standards, and we're very excited about the possibility to contribute to standards or participate in the discussions about standardization. And as you've just heard from Alex, the role of the TSC is to facilitate bringing people together to foster industry collaboration and participation to help drive standards within the BSV ecosystem. One tool we've identified to help with this is defining a technical roadmap, which I'd like to share with you this afternoon. So let's start with answering the question, why a roadmap? The TSC's mission is to promote technical excellence and improve utility of Bitcoin SV by enhancing interoperability through standardization. We see the roadmap as a tool that can help provide clear technical direction for industry that is aligned to this mission. While still very much in the early stages of definition, our goal is to have a candidate roadmap for the next several years that communicates what the outlook looks like from a Bitcoin SV standardization perspective. Its purpose is to provide some order, some sequencing, and identification of dependencies between related standards. We're now at a point where we're ready to open the roadmap up for feedback and submissions from you, the industry stakeholders. And that's the key point I want to reiterate. The roadmap is not something the TSC dictates. It's very much driven by you and what you see is important to you and your industry. To answer the question, why a roadmap a bit further, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the strategic objectives that we've defined for the roadmap. The roadmap is designed to summarize the current standardization landscape of the Bitcoin SV ecosystem. It's intended to help people navigate emerging standards organized by areas of interest based on feedback from stakeholders across the industry. To do that effectively, we've identified two strategic objectives. Firstly, provide a summary of areas within the industry that require attention with a focus on addressing the major barriers to adoption for Bitcoin SV. And then secondly, identify areas of concern with unimplemented or poorly implemented parts of the Bitcoin network model. We believe these two objectives will help manage resources and dependencies, help us with prioritizing work group selection, avoid duplication, and confirm if it's the right time for these proposals to go through standardization. Before I get into some of the detail of the current draft roadmap, I'd like to spend a little time talking about the roadmap creation timeline. After the TSC identified a need for a roadmap, we followed our own process and formed a working group of TSC members to start planning and preparing an initial draft roadmap. During this planning and preparation phase, we identified several areas of industry where we felt there was a need for standardization and put together an initial draft of the roadmap. A few weeks ago, we published the draft roadmap on our website and opened it up for feedback and submission from the community. This is where we are now with the roadmap open for participation. We're inviting stakeholders across the industry to suggest areas of focus or potential work streams that could be added to the roadmap. Over the coming months, we will also be inviting stakeholders who submitted suggestions to participate in focus groups. With this initial feedback and the insights gained from conducting these focus groups, we will use this to compile an expanded roadmap, which we'll publish for further public review. We'll then review the feedback we receive and use this to further refine the roadmap with a view to publish in and around August this year. Beyond that, we'll continue to perform a biannual or twice annual review to reassess priorities and dependencies following a similar process to the initial version. Now I'd like to walk you through the initial draft roadmap. I'd like to make it clear this is still very much draft and work in progress. The purpose at the moment is a starting point to help encourage feedback and submissions from across the industry. Before I get into the specific details of the draft roadmap, I'd like to talk about how we've structured it. We've split it into 3 parts. There's areas, these describe an area of industry where we feel there is a need for standardization. Streams, these are goal-orientated work streams that set out objectives to accomplish a goal within that area of industry. And then either in-flight standards that are currently being worked on, or prior art or proposals for consideration. There may be existing commonly adopted approaches that could be turned into standards, or there may be known proposals for a standard that could contribute to the work stream. So these are the 5 areas we've identified across the industry that we feel would benefit from standardization. Wallets, anything related to wallets or other Bitcoin clients to improve the usability, security, and adoption of Bitcoin. Client services, anything related to supporting Bitcoin clients such as APIs or supporting server-side services. Tokenization, anything related to tokenized digital assets. Regulation and compliance, anything related to helping drive compliance and regulation of Bitcoin. And then last but not least, mining, anything related to assisting miners commercialize the service they can offer on Bitcoin. As I mentioned, this is only a starting point and by no means covers every industry. And as part of opening this up for feedback, we welcome suggestions of other areas of industry that you feel could benefit from standardization. I'd now like to take you through each of the work streams we've identified for each of these areas. So let's start with wallets. We strongly believe SPV or simple payment verification is a key part to scaling Bitcoin. So we feel it's important to dedicate a stream to SPV wallets that focus on the standardization of SPV around wallets and other Bitcoin clients. The goals for this stream are to standardize direct payment exchange between wallets, standardize payment requests between merchants and wallets, standardize the process of payment verification by wallets and its successful confirmation. Let's take a look at the in-flight standards and proposed candidates we've identified. We currently have a Merkle proof standard in progress. We see Merkle proofs being pretty fundamental to the SPV model, especially as there's likely to be a wide variety of implementations transmitting and receiving Merkle proofs. It simplifies the implementation if a standard format is adopted. Other items we have for consideration are a standard for SPV envelope to standardize the exchange of SPV messages, BIP 270 to standardize a streamlined version of payment protocol, and standards for achieving multi-sig. Let's move on to client services. As I mentioned, client services are anything related to supporting Bitcoin clients such as APIs or supporting server-side processes. Due to SPV being key to scaling, we see a complementary stream within client services that focuses also on SPV. The goals for the SPV client services are standardized offline and or direct peer-to-peer communication between wallets, standardized protection to prevent fraudulent transactions, standardized fee policy specification for transaction construction, standardized callback interfaces for transaction event notifications such as double spend or SPV proofs, standardized service discovery for user-associated services. Moving on to the in-flight and under consideration for the SPV client stream, we see usability as key to Bitcoin adoption, and there's no surprises we're looking to standardize PayMail, a collection of protocols that help simplify the user experience. We also have a number of items under consideration for SPV clients, including extensions to PayMail, such as adding the ability to use cell phone or phone numbers, or supporting groups, or the ability to conduct threshold signatures over PayMail. SPV channels to provide mechanisms in which counterparties such as miners and clients can communicate in a secure manner. Orphan block notification to provide notification when orphan blocks occur. MAPI, or the merchant API, to provide services such as fee discovery or to directly submit transactions, and then potentially extensions to MAPI, such as adding double spend notifications. Changing gears a little bit, we see tokenization interoperability as an important step in the adoption and usage of on-chain tokens. So we've defined a work stream that focuses on tokenization interoperability. The goals for this stream are standardized token protocol for token representation and exchange, standardized token protocol extension for future use cases, standardized wrapping of non-standard tokens to allow interoperability between token services. And what do we have for tokenization interoperability? So we currently have in flight an envelope specification to standardize storing data on chain. And then also under consideration, we have proposals to standardize identifying protocols to identify on-chain data, standardization of data framing, and standards for defining UTXO-based tokens. Moving on to regulation and compliance. We see that this is an area that standards can really help. They help further the regulation and simplify adhering to the regulatory compliance. It certainly makes a regulator's life easier if everyone is following the same standard. With FATF recently introducing compliance for crypto exchanges and custodians, we've identified a work stream that focuses on being FATF compliant. The goals for the FATF compliant stream are adherence to FATF's recommendation 16 for virtual assets and virtual asset service providers, standardize the exchange of data between virtual asset service providers, standardize the message flows between virtual asset service providers and/or identity services. So looking at what we currently have in progress, we're currently looking at a potential standard around the FATF travel rule to comply with FATF's recommendation 16. Other proposals under consideration include standardizations for on-chain identities or KYC information and region codes. And then last but not least, mining. This is another area we see standards can help. They can help miners with commercializing the services they offer. So I've identified a work stream that focuses on mining interoperability. The goals for the mining interoperability stream are standardized APIs for interacting between miners and standardize the exchange of data between miners. Currently, we don't have anything in progress, but there's a few candidates under consideration, such as the miner ID protocol to identify mining nodes on the BSV network. We also have a proposal for a standard around authenticated channels to standardize a secure communication channel between miners. So hopefully you've got a bit more insight into the structure, the areas, the work streams we've identified, and some of the standards that are currently in progress, together with some of the prior art or proposals currently under consideration for standardization. Again, it's worth reiterating, this is still very much in its early definition. The purpose of the roadmap is to provide clear technical direction to the industry. Its role very much is to foster collaboration across the industry on agreeing standards. We're very much open to feedback from you, so we'd very much welcome feedback. We also very much encourage participation in this process, which I'll talk about next. As you heard from Alex earlier on the benefits of standards and the benefits of participating to join others to proactively shape topics that you're interested in, the same can be said for participating in feeding back and submitting to the roadmap, as it helps drive the focus and prioritization of standards across the industry. Getting involved gives you a voice at the table, allows you to enter that dialogue and be part of the conversation about something that is important to you and your business. So why should you participate? and what are some of the benefits you can gain from participating. It allows you to ensure your technical needs are being addressed in the most appropriate way that helps your business and your products. It also helps facilitate interoperability between the things you're building and the things you're consuming or integrating. It helps you avoid redundancy or rework if you participate in defining the standard or are aware of upcoming standards. You can drive priorities by raising concerns or suggestions that help you and your business. It gives you the opportunity to discover opportunities for collaboration with other participants to help lower development costs, reduce execution risk, and shorten the time to market, which ultimately increases business value to you. It enables you to keep updated on the latest trends and focus for the industry with the ability to help steer and shape this. So how can you participate? It's very straightforward. First, you need to review the roadmap, which we've published on our website. There's also some supporting documentation on the website that explains in more detail what I've summarized here today. To participate, there's a form you can complete to signal your interest in participation. So some tips on completing the form. Provide details about the areas you're interested. That could be the ones we've already identified, or that could be other new areas that we haven't yet identified. The more detail, the better. Include the challenges you see this could address. Provide details on why you think this is important. Think about the requirements or what you hope to achieve out of the standardization. As I've mentioned, we're taking a goal-orientated approach, and the more specific and explicit your goals are, the easier it is to assess the suitability and prioritization of those standards. Suggest potential ideas or methods that could be standardized that could help achieve your goals. Include details or examples on how interoperability addresses your goals. And last but not least, provide details of how this benefits the wider Bitcoin SV ecosystem. Sometimes it's difficult to see the benefits in isolation, but looking in a wider context, the value becomes much more apparent. So to finish up, I'd like to talk about the next steps. We're leaving the initial feedback and submissions open until May the 10th. So if you're interested in contributing, please participate. The final results of the roadmap become more representative of the industry at large with your participation. We're looking at organising focus groups next month to deeper dive into any feedback or submissions we receive. Based on the feedback and focus group outputs, we'll look at publishing an updated draft, which will open up for public comment. Based on the feedback we receive, we'll further refine with a view to publish the initial roadmap in August. And then beyond that, as I mentioned, we'll do a twice-year check-in to review, refine the roadmap, and ensure that it's still aligned to our objectives we've set out for the roadmap. So that's everything I wanted to share with you on the roadmap today. So that leaves me to ask the other presenters to come back and we can open up the forum for questions on the TSC standards or the roadmap. Thank you.
Thank you, James. So we're going to open our Q&A session now. We might go a little over time because our presentations have gone over time. We did allow ourselves 20 minutes, I think, for questions, but we'll just sort of see how it goes. So the hour isn't a hard stop. So I'd like to introduce Angus, who's going to chair the Q&A.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for listening. And I think I've got the easiest job of the night because Alex and James, between them, I think have covered pretty much the questions that were being run through. So there are 5 questions that were posed. Of that, one of which is a product type question, and 4 of them are more of a process type nature. So if I'll leave the product one for a little bit later, but from a process perspective, I think a lot of these have been answered in the presentation, but just a reminder. What is the process to submit a proposal? I think Alex pointed that out, tsc.bitcoinassociation.net, and you'll see submit proposal. It really is a form that you fill in and you need to submit there. And then what will the committee do with the standards that are proposed? That is, I think, also described earlier by Alex, is that a proposal is assessed by a work group, or by the committee will then decide, does this have merit and does it need to move forward? And just on that, maybe Steve, you want to weigh in a little bit on the proposals and the process we take for when a proposal comes in.
Sure. So we basically have a set of criteria that that a proposal needs to meet, and it's essentially a set of questions that need to be answered. What's the problem statement? What problem are you trying to solve? What's the industry need? Optionally, you can present a proposed solution, and there's a few other things, but it's very much a checklist type set of criteria, so that the TSC has a very objective way of assessing it. We also look at things like, is this already being done? Is there, another standard in progress, or is there already a previous standard that addresses this? And if so, then I guess we go back and ask some questions to say, are there areas that the existing standard doesn't cover? And that allows us to then go, okay, well, maybe it's better that we update the existing standard to accommodate these additional needs that are missing, rather than start with a whole fresh one. Having said that, that's still always an option. So we're very much trying to make this an objective process that anyone who actually has enough motivation and interest can get over all of the hurdles. There normally shouldn't be hurdles, because if you really do need to solve a problem, then you're going to know all of these answers anyway. So that's the process that we go through. The process takes a certain period of time, but we also do have a provisional work group mechanism where if we know that something is probably likely to meet all of the criteria and go forward, it's a way that the TSC can actually start providing the resources immediately for the people involved and motivated to kind of get to work straight away. Because we certainly recognize that you want to start working on something, and if you're told because of some cumbersome process that you've got to wait a month for approval or whatever, that sucks the motivation out of you. So we thought of that and got that covered so that you can get to work straight away if you want to.
Yeah, thanks, Steve, for that. And what another question comes in is, do you have to be a Bitcoin Association member to submit a proposal or to be part of a work group? And the simple answer to that is no. Obviously, it'd be great if you could join, and there are different categories that you could join as well. But it is quite feasible, and some of the people in some of the work groups, one of the ones I'm working in, those people are not Bitcoin Association members. They're industry experts. They sometimes come from other parts of the blockchain industry as well, or from expertise out of industry, not just the Bitcoin industry as well. And then there's a question, if you were to join a work group, how much time would I expect it to take up? I get asked this, and generally the answer is, be prepared to put in a couple of hours a month. So that's, I think you should be prepared to commit a couple of hours, but it certainly shouldn't get in the way of your day job. There are other people in the group that are all contributing ideas, etc., and there are other resources to be able to dig into some of the issues there as well. And then there's a question around, what about competing solutions? What happens if there's a proposal for a solution like PayMail or something like that? What about alternatives? So this is part of the role of the TSC, is doing oversight, is also making sure that they don't just go straight down one rabbit hole, but also to objectively consider, is this the best possible solution? And what are the alternative solutions that could be applied, alternative standards that could be applied to solve this problem, is part of the process that every one of these work groups goes through and feeds back to the TSC as well, to make sure that there is not just purely a solution focus, but making sure we're trying to attack the right solution as well. And then just looking at the others, there was a product question that came in around PayMail, whether PayMail could be used with OAuth, so that people can log in with not just with Handcash and CNP from those, but from all the other wallets, to standardize login and OAuth mechanisms, which is a bit more of the client services element. So I think you might have seen some of the answer coming up in the client services work group. And maybe I suggest Rohan, who's interested in that issue, maybe like sees what's going on there, maybe joins into that particular element. I don't know if any of the other participants or panelists want to comment on that.
I'll make a quick comment. So this is a classic case for the roadmap. I think that OAuth addition would fall under the category of a PayMail extension, although it could fall under a completely different category. So what you can do, Rowan, if you want to make sure that this gets attention, firstly, is go and put in a suggestion to make sure that this is covered under the TSC roadmap. That doesn't guarantee that it's going to get addressed, because the roadmap doesn't mean that the TSC is going to personally expend resources on making these things happen. It's still industry driven. So an item that is on the roadmap actually requires someone from the industry to take an interest in order to kind of help drive it forward. We're here to facilitate that, but not be the drivers. So if you're not specifically involved in offering a service that would make use of this OAuth, then it would fall to you, I suppose, if you want to help drive this forward, to talk to your service providers, if you're using MoneyButton or RelayX or DotWallet, etc., or Handcash. Go talk to them and say, I want this feature. Get it on their radar to say this is actually a good user experience if we add this in. And then they pick up the ball and start to drive it forward. So yeah, please do put it on the roadmap. I actually think it's a great suggestion.
Thanks, Steve. There's a question around some examples of standards that are useful in other industries. And I think that is going back to Alex's presentation around why standards. What is the benefit and value of standards? And I think to many developers, you'd find that there's a lot of value in standards, libraries you can use and standards you can use, but it works too simply as the charger for your mobile phone. You know, if only we'd got a standard going around that, you know, a couple of years back, we wouldn't all be walking around with different chargers and struggling. And then in a national sense, you've got simple standards like the plugs that you plug your laptop into, your hairdryer into. Those are typically standardized in some countries, and there's more and more move towards developing global standards for like plug adapters. So these are practical examples of where standards are really important, and that's part of why the TSC exists, is to provide those standards that are adopted and used by the industry participants. Remember, a standard is measured by its usage. And then the people will actually use them and get benefit, and businesses can grow on the back of that. And there's a question which might be for Steve. Is there any roadmap timeline to remove the limit of 1,000 unconfirmed transactions? I don't know if anyone wants to weigh in on that one.
I will. This is absolutely nothing to do with the TSC, but I understand that it's an important question for a number of people in the ecosystem. So the short answer is yes, it's absolutely our intention to do it. We're still going through various testing, etc. There are some scenarios in which the current 1,000 limit is not actually servicing the needs of some people who want to make use of it, where they have a particular sort of structure of transactions. We actually do have another release of Bitcoin SV. We're planning on dropping in the first or second week of May, which will go a long way toward addressing those issues. In the meantime, you can talk directly to miners and ask them to raise that limit, because bear in mind, it's just the default that we've set, which we thought was 40 times higher than the previous limit, but still kind of within safe regions whilst we're testing out new code and new technology. But absolutely, we intend to. We've done testing that shows there's absolutely zero difference between a limit of 1,000 and 50,000 under the most extreme conditions. Under those really extreme conditions, things start to slow down a little bit, not in a dreadful way, but they do start to slow down a bit around the 80,000 mark. So I would expect that as we put out progressive releases, we'll probably increase that limit further. We won't in 108 in May. The default limit will probably stay the same, but in subsequent releases, we'll start raising it higher and higher. The ultimate goal is get rid of it altogether.
Thanks, Steve. And then there's just one more question around PayMail extensions under consideration. There's an idea that somebody's putting forward about libraries and communicating via the libraries in PayMail. I think there's a lot of questions around PayMail, a lot of interest in PayMail, and it's one of those standards that, in a sense, I think the TSC is grandfathering. This came about, these ideas came around before the formation of the TSC, and we can recognize that these are standards which can benefit from some extensions. So what I encourage you to do is to participate in that. So join the work group, get involved, argue for what you believe is an important business or technical improvements that need to be made. And that's how we get them onto the roadmap. As we said before, this is a process about exposing what we think the roadmap should be, and to take feedback from all of you in the industry to say, this is what the sequencing and the structuring and the relative importance that the standards could be worked on. Just, I don't know if there's anything else there. There's a question about, is phraseology terms going to be standardized? I personally believe glossaries are very important, that we all use the same word for the same thing. It certainly helps communication, it helps understanding. So that might come into it. So that's something we have been thinking about in the TSC website, is to maybe help out with links, definitions, useful content that might be useful to the community, together with other resources like bitcoinsv.io, etc. But I think that probably closes up the Q&A. So if there's nothing else, Steve, can I hand back to you?
Sure, just a quick word on that. We have actually been discussing it internally, and we're using the term taxonomy, which is a set of standardized terms to classify things. And this is something that actually becomes important probably further down the track when we're managing hundreds or possibly even thousands of standards to classify them, so that when new submissions come in, we actually have a meaningful way to search for things that might overlap, etc. But Andy, who is actually one of the co-inventors of PayMail and a member of the TSC, is particularly passionate about this area, because he wants to drive an effective online library of standards and get that set up in advance of the time when we have enough standards that we actually need to be able to treat them the way that a library would treat a set of documents. So that's certainly something that's on the roadmap. Okay, well, I guess that brings us to the end of our webinar. My goal here was to take an extremely dry topic about process and standards and things that generally type to bore a lot of engineers, and hopefully show that there's some angle for it to be interesting and fun. If you get involved in a work group, the goal is, from our point of view, if we've done our job properly, you're going to spend 99% of your time focusing on the technical detail and actually ironing out a solution to a problem. And not wasting your time with administrative details that can easily be taken care of by the TSC. So I really do encourage everybody to participate. We want this organization to be driven by the industry. We have no interest in being the arbiters of what is standardized or being the decision makers in terms of what are the priorities for the industry. That's your job, and our job is to make it as easy as possible for you. And the ultimate goal is that we improve the usability of Bitcoin SV so that it can reach the global adoption that we're all working towards. There is one last question about whether the recording will be posted. Yes, yes, it will. It might take a couple of days, but we will have this posted. And of course, there's always more information available on the TSC website, tsc.bitcoinassociation.com. So thanks everybody for attending, and there'll be more webinars from the TSC in the future. So keep your eye out for that, and we'll look forward to hopefully seeing some of you in work groups. Thank you.